Hello, everyone. This is Peter
Hi.
Johnston with the Greensboro Realtors Association, and I'm joined today with a couple of our members, Kristen Ashley of 360 Realty and Rich Manzi of Next Home Triad Realty. Today, we're going to have a quick discussion about closings since the Guilford County stay-at-home order went in place. Kristen, we're going to start with you. You've had a couple of closings as a seller's agent. What differences have you seen as a seller's agent versus before the order was put in place?
So one that comes to mind is one that I closed in High Point, and the people who were selling it had to move to New York. So of course that brought up some concern with movers during all of this time. So luckily we were able to get them in the hands of Marathon Movers who followed the CDC guidelines and helped them, move their items out of the home. We wanted to have as few people as we could at the closing. So the sellers communicated with us, and we communicated with the attorneys, and we had them go and sign their portion prior to closing. We told them what they would need it, and of course they said we will bring our own pens also. So they were careful just to go in there so that there are very few people. They were able to sign their stuff beforehand, and then they didn't have to attend closing. Another one would be more of an investment property that went under contract, and the sellers did everything remotely. So what we did is we just had the packages overnighted to them. They mailed them back, and then I delivered them through a drop box at the attorney's office. I never went inside. My sellers never had to go inside. And on that one, I was able to have power of attorney. So I was able to sign it at my house, scan it back in, and send it to the attorneys, and we were able to close on
Great, that's really good information. Rich, you've represented the buyer on several closed transactions. What changes have you seen?
Um, so really, the biggest thing since the transactions that we just recently closed were all under contract prior to the stay-at-home order. Pretty much everything had been done at that point, except for when it came time to do the final walkthroughs. And for a few of the transactions, uh, they were a little bit easier. Were investors that were buying, units or condos that were already vacant. So as far as the final walkthrough went, um, examples, not knowing who the last people in the unit were, or what the sellers may or may not have touched on the way out, not knowing whether the sellers may or may not have been infected or any of their representatives. We tried to take precautions, starting with, having gloves to begin with, both, myself and the seller or the buyer wearing gloves. I disinfected the lockbox, even wiped it off with a Clorox wipe before I even opened it. And then, of course, as we went through the walkthrough on the vacant property, just again having those gloves in place, making sure that we were just not trying not to touch anything just barehanded necessarily. Again, not knowing, and then of course, it's up to the buyer to beyond that once they take possession to take whatever precautions necessary. Another thing, a couple of closings we had that did involve occupied or sellers moving out. My wife Amy actually had one last week where it got a little tricky because number one, the buyers were very health conscious and concerned about everything, and the sellers were not actually able to vacate the property completely prior to like the day before. So they were actually trying to move out, and they had movers in the house, and the buyers were freaking out because there's all these movers in when we're supposed to do the walkthrough, and they didn't want to do the walkthrough until the house was completely empty and vacant. So Amy had to really juggle the timing with everything to make sure that the sellers and the listing agent had all of their stuff out, coordinate all that, and then go in. And then same thing. We even and the sellers in that transaction were very understanding and agreeable, and they actually uh, closed out room by room and wiped things down as they were moving out and leaving. And then before they left, they wiped down the major surfaces like countertops and stuff with Clorox wipes for that new buyer. So they were very helpful and agreeable. And then the other thing that Amy did was actually took it a step beyond. And when she took those keys out of that lockbox and got all the keys from the house, she wiped them all down and disinfected all of them and put them in a Ziploc bag and then handed them to the buyer. So those keys even were disinfected before they were passed off to that buyer.
Great. So this will be for both of you. Are there any other suggestions that you might have for our agents out there to make their closings as smooth as possible?
Absolutely. I was thinking about this, and I think there were 3 words that came to mind, and one was prepare, the other one was communicate, and to encourage. I think right now we have to prepare our buyers and sellers that, we have this new normal. That seems like it's the word lately, right? In business. So if we are preparing them up front, then there's no surprises later. Then communicating. A lot of attorneys I've seen with our team this week, closings have either been done literally in a parking lot, handing documents through a car, or it's new. So you need to make sure that you're in contact and you communicate with that attorney so that you can prepare your buyer with the fact that you as the agent are probably not going to be attending closing with them. Prepare them for that up front. If they have any questions, work together with them and the attorney and make sure that they're okay with that. The last thing is to encourage them that we can still continue to do business and be an advocate for them. I know it's crazy times, but we have to remain positive, and our clients have to know that we're an expert and that we feel confident in being able to get them from contract to close.
Yep. And absolutely, I agree. And just to kind of tag on to that, just helping them through, like normally we would be, probably at the closing table with them and there to answer any questions. And what I've tried to do is, we always get the final CD ahead of time, but I've made sure to actually get on the phone with them and say, okay, let's pull this up. Let's go through line by line. Let's make sure before you go to that closing table that you understand everything and there's no questions. And, I can still provide that service and do that duty for you, even though I'm not able to sit at the closing table with you tomorrow or whenever. And I'm available to help. In fact, this morning I had a closing this morning, and 5 minutes before I was supposed to get on another Zoom call for another obligation, my buyer is calling me from the closing table with questions. And it just, I knew he was there. I'm like, I answered the call and was able to talk through what their questions were, and we still made it happen. Everything still went smoothly. And, like I said, like Kristen said, this is for right now, this is our new normal, and we just have to do the best we can and just roll with it and maintain our professionalism and not give up that service that we're obligated, and that not just obligation, but that we care about providing to our clients.
That's great information. Kristen, you had a unique situation with an older seller. Do you mind telling us about that?
Absolutely. This is probably one of my favorite sellers of 2020. Sweetest little lady. She was, I believe, 78 years old. We had put her house under contract prior to COVID-19. And unfortunately, after appraisals, inspections, due diligence negotiations, the buyer, without any rhyme or reason, terminated. And she was very upset. And I talked with her and asked her if she thought she could do a Zoom call and we could walk people through her home. So we put it back to active. She and I did a quick Zoom training. She was so precious. We had a little bit of a hard time figuring out how to reverse the camera, but after we figured that out, she took both sets of buyers through the walkthrough, and we put it right back under contract. It was the sweetest thing too, because I know we hear so many negative stories right now, but once these people went under contract, they hand delivered a thank you letter in her mailbox from their little daughter and from themselves. And they said that they fell in love with the home through the virtual tour. And they went back to look at it after it went under contract, and the lady was out of her home, and they still loved it just as much. So there are success stories.
I'd like to thank both of our members for taking the time to share some of their observations. GRA will continue to post updates, interviews, and videos to help our members keep the market moving during the Guilford County stay-at-home order.